Welcome back. My name's Sarah, and I'm so excited to start a brand new unit with you today on our big story of the Bible. Over the next few months, we're going to explore the big story of the Bible and what it tells us. But today, we're going to talk about what even is the Bible. What is the Bible? Leaders, take some time to build a list of ideas your group shares. Is the Bible a book of rules? Now, there are rules in the Bible that teach us the best ways to live, but that's not mainly what the Bible is. Is the Bible a book about good people and bad people so that we can learn how to be like the good people? No. There are lots of stories about people, but even the ones that are kind of heroes, they definitely aren't perfect. The point of the Bible is not mainly a bunch of stories showing us how to be good people. What is the Bible? It is a story, and it is a story about what God has done through Jesus. Who's the main character of the Bible? Like, who's it mostly about? Jesus. Sometimes when we read the Bible, we think it's mostly about us, but it's not. It's about Jesus and what he has done in the life of the world and what he can do in our lives. That's what the Bible is, a big story pointing us to Jesus. See this big, long timeline? This traces the story of the Bible through history. And over the next few months, we are going to fill it in and learn a bunch of the little stories along the way in the big story.
The obvious place to start. What is the Bible?
What is the Bible? Magic Flannel Graph and I will have you straightened out in no time. Right, Magic Flannel Graph? My point exactly. You see, the Bible is a book, and it isn't. It is, and it isn't. Are you with me?
I don't think so.
All right, let me do this another way. Magic Flannel Graph? So the Bible is a book. It's got pages and words just like other books. But if you open it up, you realize it's actually lots of books. 66 to be exact. There are books of history, books of poetry, books that are really letters written to different people or churches.
Are there any books about ponies?
No. But there's even a book that talks about the end of the world. But we'll save that one until the end. It's a little tricky.
Wow. So the Bible is sort of like other books and sort of isn't.
That's right. Most books are written by just one person. The Bible was written by more than 40. Most books are written in, 6 months or a year. We think the Bible may have been written over as much as 1,600 years. 1,600 years! That's like writing a book from the end of the Roman Empire until today.
Done. That's incredible.
Okay, it's time for a quick game. All you need is a piece of paper and something to write with. I'm going to ask you a bunch of Bible number questions, and you're going to write down your best estimate and don't say anything out loud. And then when your teacher says go, you're going to hold up your paper and reveal your answer to your leader. And they'll press play, and I'll reveal the answer. And the person closest to that can get a small prize. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. The Bible isn't really a book. It's a whole library of books. How many different books are there in the Bible? "66. How many different books are in the Old Testament? "39. And how many different books are in the New Testament? "27. Maybe you got that if you're really good at subtraction. About how long of a time period was the Bible written over? About 1,600 years. And about how many people wrote the Bible? About 40. Let's name some different kinds, some different genres of books or movies, different kinds of text, different ways of media that we get information. Make a list with your leader. Maybe you've learned in school that there are texts written to inform or persuade or entertain. And that could be like a written book. It could be a pamphlet, a magazine. It could be a video. It could be a TikTok. It could be anything. And there are like science fiction and nonfiction and news and comics and poetry and history and instruction manuals and social media posts and memes. In the library of the Bible, there are different kinds of books, and we have to read them in different kinds of ways. Just like in school, you learn how to read a text that's written to inform differently from how you learn to read a text that's written to entertain.
Now, the Old Testament books are divided into 4 sections. The Torah, or Pentateuch, that means 5 books. The historical books, the prophets, and the writings, or wisdom literature. We'll get into all that later. The New Testament also has 4 sections. The Gospels, which tell the story of Jesus. The Acts of the Apostles, which talks about the early days of the church and Paul's missionary trips. The Letters, or Epistles, that's a fancy word that means, letters. And the Revelation to John, the really wild book at the back that talks about the end of the world. Any questions?
I've got a question. Why do they call them testaments? Do they give you fresh breath? Because I licked one and it didn't work.
No, they don't call them testaments. They call them testaments. Can you clue us in, Pastor Paul?
The word testament comes from the Latin word testamentum, meaning oath or covenant. A covenant and an oath are promises, so the word testament means promise.
Thanks, Pastor Paul. So the Bible is split up into 2 sections. One section is called the Old Promise, and the second section is called the New Promise. You know what a promise is, don't ya? It's when you make a commitment, when you say you're gonna do something, no matter what.
So who's making these big promises in the Bible, and what are they promising?
Well, let's see.
The Bible is the story of God and what He's done for us. So these big promises must be
promises God has made to us.
Whoa, that's really big. Even bigger than a pony.
I think you're right.
The books in the Old Testament and the New Testament have one big difference. What is that? The Old Testament was written before Jesus took on flesh and became a human person like we celebrate at Christmas. And the New Testament was written after Jesus was a human on earth. You're going to play a little game now where you're going to sort out books of the Bible or stories that are part of the New Testament or part of the Old Testament. You just have to think about, did this happen before Jesus was born as a human or after? And that'll tell you if it's in the Old or the New Testament. So what you're going to do is you're going to have 2 teams, and each team will have a New Testament bucket and an Old Testament bucket. And you're going to get some balls, and you have to take turns throwing the balls in the right bucket. On each ball will have a story, and it's either from the Old Testament or the New Testament. At the end, when everyone's thrown all their balls in the buckets, then your teacher will check which ones are right or wrong, and we'll see which team got the most in the right bucket. Have fun! Last year, if you were here for the big story of the Bible, we looked at 2 themes. Atonement, that's a big fancy word we'll talk about later, and the presence of God. This year, we're going to focus on the covenants as we look at the big story of the Bible. The covenants are special 2-way promises that God has made with us, and we'll see how they're all fulfilled in Jesus. Each week, we're going to review the big story of the Bible, but let's go through that story once all together now. In the beginning, God made the whole everything, and it was good. And He made us, He made humans in His image. and we were very good. He made us to live with him and be in his presence in the garden. But we chose to do things our own way instead of trusting God. But at that moment where we didn't trust God, he made a promise. He said one day he would send the snake crusher to crush sin and evil and death forever. But things got worse and worse and worse and worse, and people kept doing what was right in their own eyes instead of trusting God. But eventually, God launched his rescue plan with a man named Abraham, and he promised him 3 things. He made a covenant with him and promised to give him a whole people, to make him into a great nation, to give them their own land, and to make them a blessing to the whole world. And Abraham's family grew and grew and grew, fulfilling the first part of God's promise. But they ended up in slavery in Egypt, not in their own land that God had said they would be in. But God rescued them and brought them out of slavery and brought them into their own land. And there he made a covenant with the people. He promised to be their God, and they promised to be his people and to obey his commands. But they did not. And even as they went into the land that he had promised them, they kept disobeying his commands, and things kept getting worse and worse and worse. And they would cry out to God and say, God, help us. And he would send a judge and help them. And then they would forget about him and stop trusting him and do things their own way and get worse and worse. And this happened time after time, 12 times. And then the people cried out for a king, but God was supposed to be their king. But God gave them a king, and the first one wasn't so good. And the second one seemed really good. Maybe he was the snake crusher. Maybe he was the one who was going to defeat sin and death. God made him a promise. He said that this king, David, would always be on the throne and that he would establish his house forever. But David wasn't the snake crusher, and he gave in to sin too. And so it looked like maybe God's promise would not be fulfilled after all. And things kept getting worse. The people kept disobeying God more and more and trusting in their own ways, being horrible to each other and taking advantage of the weak. And things got so bad that God rose up another nation to carry the people away into exile, away from the land that had been promised to Abraham. But even there, he made them a promise, another promise. He said that he was going to make a new covenant, and that this covenant would change their hearts, that he would bring them back to himself. And after 70 years in exile, the people were returned to the land that had been promised to Abraham. So the people had a land, and they were a whole people, but they hadn't yet been a blessing to the whole world. And for 400 years, there was silence, as the people had returned from exile, but not really, because there were a lot of other nations still in control of them. And then Christmas. And then Jesus was born. And as we look through the story of the New Testament, we see how he was the answer to all the covenant promises. He was the snake crusher. He was going to be the blessing to the whole world promised to Abraham. He would be the one true Israelite who could actually obey God's commands and keep them. And he was the son of David that would sit on the throne forever. But then he died. He died on the cross to be the sacrifice, to pay for all of the disobedience that all the people and all of us have done. But he didn't stay dead. Death could not hold him, and he rose again 3 days later. And then he hung out with his friends and disciples for 40 days before he ascended back to the Father and sent the Holy Spirit to be with us, to be with all people. The blessing to the whole world, not just for the nation of Israel anymore, but for everyone. And so his disciples and followers started telling everyone the good news that sin and death had been defeated, that Jesus was really the king of the world and had come back to life. And the word about Jesus spread to the whole world, even spread to us today. And that's where we are today. But the world isn't perfect yet. There is still death. There is still sin, even though it's been defeated. And one day, Jesus is going to return, and he's going to reunite his dwelling space, heaven, and our dwelling space, earth. He's going to come and be with his people, and we will get to be with our God together in a new creation, a new heaven, and a new earth that keeps going on forever and ever and ever and getting better and better, where every day is like a new page in the best book you've ever written, and it just keeps getting better. And that's the big story of the Bible. By the end of this unit, you are going to be able to tell that story. Right now, we're going to play another game. You and a partner are going to get cards on them with different stories from the big story of the Bible. And you're going to try to put them in the right order. When you think you've got it right, put your hand up, and your leader will come over and tell you which ones are right and which ones are wrong. And then you can try and fix the mixed up ones. And the first pair to have them all in the right order wins. Have fun. Today, as you pray, thank God that he has revealed himself to us in the story of the Bible. That we don't have to guess who he is or wonder what he's like, that he shows himself to us. And thank God that he always keeps his promises, his covenants to us. For today's craft, you're going to get a sheet with the timeline on it. But there's a big white space, and in there, you're going to draw your very favorite Bible story, or at least one of your favorite Bible stories. And after you draw that story, your leader is going to help you draw a line to where it fits on the Bible timeline. You guys did a great job reading the book of Mark for yourself. And we want to help you guys continue planting your family in Christ and being passed on the truth to by continuing to read the whole story of the Bible. Now, the book of Mark is one thing, but trying to read some of those Old Testament books for yourself might be a little hard. So we have two great Bibles that are super fun with lots of illustrations. Maybe you have one of these at home. Put up your hand if you have the Beginner's Bible at home, and put up your hand if you have the Jesus Storybook Bible at home. If you don't and you'd like one, you can maybe talk to your parents about getting one today. We have extras that you guys can buy at church. We also have a reading and watching plan. So we have a plan that tells you which stories in each of these children's Bibles you can read at home with your parents so that you can follow along with what we're learning in Kids Church. And we also have a watching plan. There's a great show called What's in the Bible, and we use lots of those clips here in New Hope Kids. And you can watch those whole episodes at home with your whole family. You can do that for free on Right Now Media. Right Now Media is a little like Netflix, but it's got some really great content that helps us learn about who God is and the Bible. And you can get a subscription to that for free. Just ask your parents, and they can help you watch What's in the Bible, and I promise your parents will learn something too. And of course, I'm sure you are all just waiting to hear about our amazing raffle. We know who the winners are of the Book of Mark Challenge, and so if you won a raffle prize, your leaders will give you your raffle prize today. Great job, everyone, and keep reading and engaging with God's Word. See you next week.
The Bible's an important book, but it's really long.
Yeah, it's a collection of many books written over a long period of time, but altogether they tell one unified story.
So, what's the story of the Bible?
Well, it begins by introducing us to a beautiful mind, the author of all reality, a being called God. And he has the power to take the dark chaos of the uncreated world and bring about order and beauty and a garden full of life.
And to crown this accomplishment, God appoints these creatures called humanity,
or in Hebrew, Adam,
and they're made as God's image.
which means that they're commissioned to rule this beautiful world on God's behalf by harnessing all of its potential and creating even more beauty and order.
This is a story about humans using their power to do meaningful, life-giving work. But the question is, how?
Yeah, humanity now faces a choice that's represented by a fruit tree. So humans could partner with God and find freedom by trusting in his knowledge of good and evil.
Or
They could seize power and define good and evil on their own, which, God warns, will kill them.
and they hear the voice of a dark, mysterious creature that tells them the choice is simple. Take the fruit. It'll give you power and freedom to rule the world on your own terms.
And so they seize this knowledge, and as a result, they become suspicious and self-protective. It leads to fractured relationships, violent power grabs, and ultimately, a whole civilization, Babylon, that has redefined evil as good. And so, God scatters this corrupted human project.
And here the story of the Bible takes an important turn. We zoom into the story of a man and a woman who come out of Babylon, Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah, God promises that from them will come a new people, a nation that has another chance to make the right choice. And if they succeed, it will open up this new way forward for the rest of humanity.
And this is why the rest of the Bible story is about this family.
And it does not go well. Despite God's personal guidance, Abraham's family gives in to that same temptation to redefine good and evil on their own terms, apart from God.
Even when their best people were in charge, rulers who loved God's guidance and had divine wisdom, even they gave in.
And so Israel was warned by their own prophets that these choices would lead them back to Babylon, this time as conquered captives living in exile, and that's exactly what happened.
So even with God's personal guidance, Israel fails. Who can succeed?
Well, the prophet said that the story wasn't over. God's going to send a new leader to Israel to cover for their failures and to transform the people's hearts and minds so that they can make the right choice.
And so the part of the Bible called the Old Testament ends, and these promises are left hanging.
And then the biblical story continues into the New Testament. We're introduced to a man who comes from the line of Israel's kings, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said that he was bringing all these promises to their completion.
He confronted that dark, mysterious evil that all humanity has given into and resisted its power.
And then he announced that God had arrived to rule the world through himself. Jesus taught about God's definition of good and evil, and he said that real power is serving others. According to Jesus, it's people who love the poor and even love their enemies. These are the kinds of people who actually rule the world.
And that's confusing, but also really beautiful.
And so is the claim that the story goes on to make about Jesus, that he is God become human, to be for Israel and for all humanity what we could never be for ourselves. He came to take the consequences of our evil into himself, and his sacrificial love proved more powerful than evil, than even death itself.
So now humanity's presented with a new choice.
Represented by a new tree.
Stick with the old way of being human, or venture into this new way.
And in the story, those who choose the way of Jesus find themselves energized by God's own power. People who know that they are loved and forgiven by God can become people who love and forgive others in return.
The Jesus movement quickly spread throughout the world, forming these new communities of people who follow the way of Jesus.
But they faced problems. There was persecution from the outside by people in power, and inside there was confusion, even compromise.
Yeah, because following Jesus is really hard.
And so the movement's leaders, called apostles, they wrote letters to comfort and to challenge these communities to stay faithful to the difficult way of Jesus.
And they're called to hope for the day when Jesus will come and change everything.
And so the Bible ends by pointing to the future day, when all wrongs are made right, when evil is eradicated, heaven and earth are united, and humanity can rule the world together in the love and power of God.